On April 12th, the Development Research Center of the Guizhou government in China revealed through social media platforms that Guizhou province has serious local debts. The debts are so much that it's unable to digest them on its own and is asking for help from the central government. This means that China will have its first bankrupt province. This information was spread on the Chinese internet for 3 days. The article has now been deleted, and its various reprints on China's major social media platforms have also disappeared, one after another. Guizhou province is located in southwestern China and has a resident population of about 40 million. In addition to Han Chinese, more than 60% of the population is made up of various ethnic minorities. The province is rich in tourism resources thanks to its many mountains and rivers. In recent years, it has begun to focus on developing tourism and promoting itself as a mountain park province. The song young people sang, "No Ideal, No Heartbreak," featured in our previous episode, took place in the capital city of Guizhou province. According to an April 12th release from the Development Research Center of the Guizhou provincial government, the center has recently examined the debt situation of several local governments, including the provincial capital city. It found that the local debt problem has become a major and extremely important problem to be solved, but due to limited financial resources, it is extremely difficult to move forward, and relying solely on its own ability has been unable to reach an effective solution. The research team said it would seek the support of the State Council to propose feasible solutions for resolving the matter. The local debt problem in Guizhou has drawn attention before. The 2020 debt ratio ranking of major cities in mainland China shows that Guiyang, the provincial capital, reached 929%. According to statistics from the Guizhou Provincial Department of Finance, the province's debt reached over 1,000 billion yuan, or about $180 billion by the end of 2022, excluding hidden debts of local governments. Most of the government's hidden debts consist of liabilities of urban construction investment companies. They are conservatively estimated to be around $150 billion. Urban construction investment companies are the investment and financing platforms of the governments of major cities across the country. The annual revenue of Guizhou was less than $29.1 billion per year for the past 3 years, but the expenditure was more than $80 billion, most of which came from issuing bonds and transfer payments from the central government. In 2020, the debt expenditure alone amounted to $22.4 billion, of which the principal repayment was $16.2 billion, and the interest payment was $6.2 billion. This province is racking up more debt and has become a landmine that is about to explode. Dushan County alone, for example, is $5.8 billion in debt and with an annual revenue of $150 million. It would take the local government 40 years to pay it back without any other spending and excluding interest payments. The CCP's central treasury is equally strained. In January this year, China's finance minister called out through the media that the next step will be to further reduce the expectation of government underwriting. A previous official letter issued by the Ministry of Finance also emphasized that for local debt risks, the principle of no assistance from the central government should be implemented, and whoever owns the child will take care of their own. In January this year, the Guizhou government tried to follow the central government's advice and solve its own problems. It has tried to solve the debt risk by promoting the full amount of government debt and hidden debt interest to be included in the budget and issuing government bonds to replace hidden debt. These methods obviously have little effect. The most known product in this province is a type of liquor called Maotai. The rest of the industries in the province are no good. No one would dare to buy the bonds even if the provincial government wanted to issue them. In November 2020, Guizhou announced that it had eradicated poverty, being the last province in China to do so. It also announced that China was on track to achieve President Xi Jinping's goal of eradicating poverty and moving it into a well-off society by the end of 2020. Unfortunately, that was only 2 years ago, embarrassing CCP chairman Xi Jinping. In reality, there are many areas in China that were once poor and remain poor. What the Guizhou government did was very unusual. The rule of the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP officialdom, has always been to report the good news but not the bad. The Provincial Research Center, according to the usual procedure, should report to the provincial government first and then address the matter in private. However, what happened was before it officially reported to the central government, it posted an article publicly to expose its own scandal, saying that the province wasn't able to solve the problem and needed help from the top. Is this a momentary mix-up by the officials of the research center, or do they have the support of the governor and the provincial party secretary behind them? Such a move is like calling out directly to the premier of the State Council of China, demanding financial assistance from the central government. It also serves as a public push to Zhongnanhai, where the central government is. Help me or I will die. On the Guizhou website, a Chinese equivalent of Quora, one netizen responded with an article titled, "Guizhou is starting to buy land." Buy land or let it rot is a slang that has recently become popular in China. It means giving up trying or stop putting real efforts into something, usually due to some external, unreasonable situation like an overall pessimistic economic situation, terrible management system, peer pressure, etc. Another netizen wrote, "What will happen if the trillion yuan of local debt owed by Guizhou is not repaid? There is nothing you can really do about it because the provincial government isn't like an individual. If it's an individual who owes money and doesn't pay, you can auction off the personal assets and report them to the credit bureau to make the debtor a defaulter." Some suggested, should they sell Maotai to pay off their debts? Its market value is over 1 trillion RMB. Such a direct request for relief from the central government by the Guizhou provincial government is actually similar to what Evergrande did in 2021. Evergrande was facing a debt storm and it issued a letter to force the government to save it. "If I don't get help, I will die on you." That was Evergrande's attitude and approach. It angered Xi Jinping's government. Evergrande's owner, Xu Jiayin, was then forced to sell his personal assets, including his mansion and private jet, within 4 months to realize more than US $1 billion and inject it into the company. But in the end, the government still chose to save Evergrande. Now Guizhou has learned this trick, or it's really at its wit's end. In this debt-ridden province, there are crowds of young people who can't find jobs. The Guizhou government's approach is very worrying to some sober Chinese people because the financial management of many Chinese families is to invest in the urban investment bonds of various cities. These assets held by ordinary people are the assets of these urban investment companies, namely the government's debt. The Guizhou government has effectively told the public that they can't solve the debt problem on their own. If the provincial government defaults on its debt, then the average Chinese family who holds these so-called assets will also be emptied of their assets. What can the central government do to get the money and help local governments pay off their debts? To realize the money, there would be significant inflation. That's why a netizen wrote, "Maybe in the future you have to buy a cabbage with a bag of bills." According to official figures from the Chinese government, China's economy grew by only 3% in 2022. Along with the decline in economic growth is the explosive deficit in local finances. In the first half of last year, none of the 31 provinces and municipalities, including Shanghai, Guangdong, Jiangsu, and Zhejiang, which are economically developed jurisdictions, had fiscal surpluses. As of the end of December 2022, official figures show that the nation's local government debt reached about 35 trillion yuan, or about $5 trillion US. Given that official figures have always been watered down, it's highly possible that the actual debt situation of local governments is much more serious than the published figures. As Reuters revealed earlier, China's local government debt exceeded US 9 trillion. According to Fitch International, the amount of overseas debt due by local governments through local financing platforms in 2023 has increased to US 790 billion, a record high since 2021. China is currently experiencing a major economic slowdown. The government is not collecting enough taxes. The real estate bubble is on the verge of collapse and cannot continue the previous land-based economic Ponzi scam. On the other hand, the outside world remains suspicious of China after the epidemic restrictions were lifted, making it difficult for the Chinese government to attract foreign investment. With more foreign companies pulling out of China, international orders have dropped sharply, and now even the Pearl River Delta and Yangtze River Delta regions with developed manufacturing industries are facing a massive wave of unemployment. That is to say, it's going to be difficult for the developed provinces to contribute more money to subsidize other poor areas.
Orders for factories in Vietnam are already scheduled for next year, and orders for factories in China are scheduled for tomorrow. Apple factories are already producing in Vietnam, and 1/3 of these factories in Vietnam are moved from China. We all know the current situation of the manufacturing industry. Factories recruit people with high standards, such as age, education, household registration, ethnicity, etc. These are all just superficial. The real situation is that there are no orders, and factories don't need so many people. The number of unemployed people is increasing. Companies will naturally pick people who are young and hardworking. Don't blame the factory for being ruthless. It's the reality.
A massive wave of unemployment has swept the country, followed by pay cuts at major companies, including organizations that were previously considered as iron rice bowls.
My goodness, state-owned enterprises have actually cut their salaries, and even by half. Can you believe it? Last night, I was having dinner at my aunt's house. My aunt's relative told me that her husband was also facing unemployment and a pay cut. When I heard that, I was shocked. Her husband had joined a state-owned enterprise after graduating from college and earned about US $2,600 a month after taxes, not counting other benefits. The company gave him everything: food, drinks, toiletries, etc. They don't need to buy any of that stuff. They bought a 170 square meter condo near my home, and we all envy her. They are living comfortably, paying a mortgage with the housing fund of a state-owned enterprise. I never thought that the residual effects of the general environment would also shock them. Their company has given them two options. One is to leave with some compensation. The other is to reduce their salary by half. What are you going to do?
Banks have taken a pay cut. Today, a friend from a bank told me their salaries have been cut by 30%. That's not a small amount. What surprised me even more was the next thing he said. He said the company sent them a notice last night at 9:30 p.m. Why 9:30 p.m.? Because they were probably afraid of people's protests. Notice at 9:30 p.m. it can give everyone a night buffer time. The friend said that with the salary being reduced, other benefits may also be reduced. In addition, are banks the only ones in the financial industry that have lowered their salaries? Nope. Other financial companies have also done it. For example, the top-ranked securities companies have reduced their per capita salary from US $98,000 a year to $67,000. This is a 32% reduction. Banks and other financial institutions cutting salaries, what does it tell us? The overall economic environment isn't as good as we'd like it to be. Against this background, imagine that all kinds of local debts in the country should add up to hundreds of trillions of RMB. If the central government carries the burden directly, it will cause serious inflation and devaluation of the RMB. At this time in China, prices have already risen sharply. Today is March 13th, 2023. As a fruit seller for 7 or 8 years, I would like to say that the current price of fruit is really outrageous. All fruits are increasing in price, which is something I haven't seen in my 8 years of practice. Homegrown fruits such as watermelons, small tomatoes, pineapples, and the better ones, including croissant honey melons, etc., are all going up. Imported fruits such as durian and mangosteen prices have always been high, so for us who sell fruit saying fruits are expensive, it is even more difficult for consumers to accept the price. Take one of the most outrageous single products as an example, watermelon. We get with the wholesale price of one case is $1.5 for 500 grams. Without the case, it is more than $1.7 in cost for 500 grams. In addition, the central government also knows that the image projects by local governments and the construction of infrastructure and real estate that can't pay for themselves have become the most important method for local governments to develop their economies, forming a serious dependence. The officials' wanton corruption is another persistent problem. If a jurisdiction is fully covered by the central government, local officials would be even bold to toss about it, and even if it is resolved for a while, it will cause even greater trouble in the future. Look, Guizhou province destroyed the forests in the countryside and made terraces to grow rice. Now they have changed it back and planted trees again. It shows how chaotic the management mindset of these officials is. There are a lot of cracks in some farmland in Guizhou province. It makes one wonder if it has anything to do with human interference. Chinese media previously reported that in poor areas including Guizhou province, local governments spent financial resources on cosmetic projects in the name of building beautiful villages. The sparsely populated villages where people have little income consume large amounts of money to build scenic buildings. A few years ago, Guizhou County, a national poverty-stricken county with a population of 400,000 and an annual revenue of only about US 150 million, went into debt for US 5.8 billion to build various luxury scenic spots, including a US 30 million building in the ancient style, the world's first water temple. It was never completed and became a rotten-tail building. However, no matter how reluctant the central government is, there is a great chance that it will eventually step in to help Guizhou. The current total debt of Guizhou province is about US 180 billion. It isn't too big because the province is relatively poor and its economic size isn't large. But Xi Jinping should be very angry with a group of local officials. But the provinces and cities just changed their officials between the end of last year and the beginning of this year, and they are all considered Xi Jinping's own people, so it will be quite troublesome to deal with them. For the central government, solving the problem in Guizhou province is likely to be just a way to stall for time. They face even greater incoming problems which are insurmountable. The trouble is that more and more provinces will be sending signals of bankruptcy following Guizhou. This is because these provinces will also find that their debts have reached a point where they can no longer be maintained by borrowing new money to repay old ones. Declaring bankruptcy to the public can, to some extent, put public opinion pressure on the State Council and the Ministry of Finance, thus prompting the Chinese central government to come to a quicker financial rescue. The engines of China's reform and opening up to date have been money printing, investment exports, and real estate, and now almost all establishments, all individuals, and all segments have loans of varying degrees. Despite nearly 40 years of rapid growth, the structural contradictions remain unresolved in China, and the CCP is facing a high risk of a concentrated outbreak of debt defaults. The debt issue will be like kicking the ball back and forth between the central and local levels and the financial industry. It's going to be a dead-end situation. More and more money will be printed, but the market can't absorb it. If the central government chooses to issue a huge amount of money to clear the debt, it will trigger drastic inflation, and high prices will put hundreds of millions of home slaves, i.e. Chinese people with high loans, in a difficult situation. Printing money or not printing money are both dead ends. What's more serious is that if economically developed places like the Yangtze River Delta and the Pearl River Delta become highly indebted as well, the international capital market might start selling off China's national bonds. By that time, the problem will be much more serious. Whether the central government's Ministry of Finance, with the assistance of the People's Bank of China, is capable of absorbing the massive sell-off of China's government bonds in the international debt market will become a question. At that moment, the current local debt crisis would become a joint debt crisis of both local and central finance of China. Possibly, one way to alleviate the debt crisis would be to seize the proceeds of corruption from China's vast corrupt officials and to cut back on the massive so-called social stabilization spending. But the odds of such a path are slim.